Well, as you can see, we've got the planks on the boat now. Just want to show you the seam right here. You know, I scraped off the bedding once it dried, and then I took a scraper and scraped the wood and that to get it to grade, because the planks aren't exactly the same thickness when you put them up there. They kind of cup a little bit, or the grain's different in a different direction, and they swell and contract different. So, you know, in order to paint it up really nice the first time, you got to get that grade really nice through there, and all that steeple grain and everything too. But you can see the bedding in there. You can't get the planks perfectly tight one into the other. You go crazy trying to fit them. You know, what I've done was cut one off the other with the skill saw. And this seam probably is tighter on the other side and doesn't even go in very deep, because the edges of the planks got rounded. Everything happened to these things between the time I fit them and the time they go on the boat. That's just natural. So, you know, it comes out really, really nice like this. And when you paint it, you cannot tell there's a seam there. The idea here now is to get a shear line on it. Now, you know, it's movable. It doesn't have to be exactly like the model, but I think the model is great reference. So I think what I've got here is probably a couple inches lower than the model shows, but I think it looks exactly right to me. Now, I had it up here just really quickly just to practice clamping it on more so than anything, and I ran a pencil line down there, but it has nothing to do with the shear whatsoever. Shear will be right here, and in order to cut it, I'm going to measure from the shear line down and tack the batten down here somewhere, so that I can put the skill saw on there and follow the batten, and it'll come out nice and true. I'm also going to cut it, I think, on about 8 degrees, or even maybe as much as 10 degrees of a bevel, and it's going to cut the frame heads off at the same time. Maybe I won't be able to cut all the way through the frame heads, but it'll be all nice and consistent and a nice angle, so then I can just polish it off with a handsaw. Because believe me, cutting those things off is a pain. And if you cut them off once and it's not low enough, you got to cut them off twice. And if that's not right, you got to cut them off again. And it's like, oh man, you know, it's just, it doesn't work out. So, you know, this is my plan here, to take care of it this way. And I don't want the gunnels on a 90-degree angle to the side. I just think the gunnel is tipped up a little bit too much like that because of the flare of the boat to make it look exactly right. So I'm going to cut the top of the frames and the plank on an angle, like I said, 8 degrees or so, and put the inwales down a little lower than the guards, and you know, have the caps on like maybe a 4-degree angle or 5-degree angle. It'll look really nice. It'll be the same basic angle as you see on the transom right now. So here's the model I made years ago. It was 3/4 of an inch to the foot, so what I've done was measure inside from the sole up to the shear in numbers of different places and transferred it to the boat. And like I had said before, you know, it doesn't always look exactly the way it looks in some scale like this. So I lowered it a little tiny bit, and I think that's it right there. So I'm going to strike a line right there at the top of the batten all the way down, and then take the batten off and see how far away I have to tack a batten to follow it with my saw. And that's what I'm going to do. Well, I'm back here at the transom, and I'm just going to try to figure out what I want to have for an angle on the top of the gunnel. And I kind of like it to be just about like this. It's just got a little grade to it. So I'm going to take my little contraption here and put it on top of the transom, and I can adjust the level that's in it till it's exactly on. And then I'm going to take it down and read the degrees. It's in 2-degree increments. So that's 5 degrees right there. Well, then I put it on the side of the boat like that. You could put it this way if you wanted, or any which way, but now we're going to check the angle on the side as compared to plumb or level. So I can set my little level right in the middle like that, and then take a reading. 10 degrees right there. So the two are 5 degrees apart is what you got here. So what I'm going to do is set my saw on about 6 or 7 degrees, because I want to cut downhill from exactly where I want the gunnel to be, so that I can adjust the inwale up and down to compensate for any discrepancy. But I'm hoping to cut them once and never have to cut them again. This frame right here will have to be cut lower, to put a knee on top of it, if I put a knee on top of it. The forward one also has to be cut lower for the breast hook to go on top, but I'm going to cut it this time, this height, because there's no problem doing it, and later on I'll have to cut it again. Now let me show you the circular saw that I'm going to be using to cut the shear. It's an 8 1/4 inch circular saw, so it cuts naturally about a 1/2 inch deeper than a 7 1/4, and it cuts 5 3/8 of an inch from the edge of the table to the blade. So the other thing you want to make sure when you're making a cut like this is it measures the same on this end that it does on this end. Otherwise, the table's not exactly parallel to the blade. That'll kind of mess you up. So you'd want to cut this until it was exactly right, which I've done. The other thing I've done is I cut the corner of the motor out right here. The idea was to get the saw to taxi along a batten and not have it foul the plastic, because the bed wasn't wide enough. It's not way over here. So I've just gone with this and cut that right out. It didn't get involved with any of the electric or anything else, and it's been that way for years. It's never been a problem. The other thing I did was I actually cut the bed around the gearbox to lower it down more. I've also cut the corner out of the handle on both sides here so that the two would slide a little bit further on each other. This piece is now sticking above this by 1/4 inch at least. I think the saw is cutting probably 3/8 of an inch deeper than it used to when I bought it. So, you know, that's sometimes an advantage to me if I'm trying to rip something real thick. As you cut, you can't allow the saw to go in and out. It'll bind. You can't allow the saw to go this way or it'll bind. You know, it has to follow that batten exactly right, and I have to really keep it stuffed against the side of the boat. And the other thing I can say is that I'm following this side because it's got more bed on the boat. You know, if I wanted to go the other way, this would be following the batten, and it would be easier to make the saw wander like this as far as that bevel goes. So this is the way I'm set up. We're going to go over here and move the batten 3/8 or 5 3/8 of an inch from the line that I drew, and we're going to pick up the saw and cut. Because it's on an angle, see? There's no way to figure out where you get started like this. You can't do it. You have to put the saw in, put the saw like this, right? And then put it up there like that, then loosen it up and plunge cut it, right? And then once you get it in, then you can go somewhere. But if you didn't have this, it could just come kicking right out of there, fly right out of there. Dangerous. Well, let's get started with this cut. Now, I said you couldn't plunge, and you can't with the saw, like for the front of the table, and plunge it in like you would with other saws. What we have to do here is plunge it on its own tracks so that it doesn't bind the cut. And it didn't. It went right in really nice, and then, you know, it's very easy to taxi along from there. But that's the hard part right there in the pot. Very few people would be interested in trying, and I wouldn't suggest anybody try it at all, and especially without a kickback block, because that saw could be ripped out of your hands and thrown 20 feet, just like a kickback with a chainsaw. Well, I'm working my way along here, and what I do is I push the saw maybe 2 feet or 1.5 feet or something like that, and then I stop and move myself, and then I push the saw off some more and stop and move myself. This is the deepest that this saw will cut, and it's actually pretty convenient because it doesn't saw the frame off all the way, and that means that the scrap doesn't go flying and denting the inside of the boat or just getting thrown by the blade. So, you know, the frames don't move a lick, and you go right by them and you cut that piece off afterwards after you remove the plank. Well, I'm finishing this cut right now, and what I'm going to do is take a look on the inside, because I'm going to creep right up to that post and not cut into it. And anytime you stop cutting, you want to make sure that the blade stops completely before you pull it out of the cut, especially with this saw, because it has no guard on it. So I'm very careful not to set it down with the blade spinning. Now I'm going to take my 10-point handsaw and cut the rest of it off. There's only like 1/8 of an inch left, and I wouldn't want to use like a 6-point, you know, or an 8-point, because what it'll do is just rip at it more so than really cut it. So this is pretty easy, and as we cut these off, we're starting to get the first look at the shear without the frame head sticking up. It's going to be quite a transition, actually. You can see that the top of the frames aren't level. You know, they're tilted a little bit, about 5 degrees back aft, and maybe as much as 10 degrees up forward. Now that I've got the shear cut into the starboard side, I can pick up the dimensions from the bottom on the inside and transfer them to the other side on the same frame. And what I have to do to get it on the outside, there's numbers of different ways, but I'm just going to pick up a drill and drill a hole right through to the outside, so I can pick up my spots on the other side real easy. I've tacked the batten on the port side, but I'm checking very carefully at the bow that the batten and the shear cut will be exactly the same height, so it looks real nice. Now, so I transfer the measurement from one side to the other side with a square right across the stem. On the port side, I'm going to start from aft and cut my way forward. And I'm going to make my plunge cut. It looks great when you look over the inside and watch it happen from inside. I cut from right to left, and I can't do it any other way. So this is the way to do it. This is the only way that the saw, can be adjusted to the right angle. So I'm off to the races on the port side. Look how easy it cuts when it goes through the frame head. I mean, it's absolutely no strain or any binding or anything. It cuts perfectly clean right through there. So I'm just going to taxi along and cut the whole length, easy beams, and then I'm going to stop right when I get near the stem, because I would either have to reduce the saw's depth or I could just trim that piece off with a chisel later on. It still needs to have the frame heads cut off, so we're going to do that, and the shear is just going to appear right out of nowhere. It looks like an island boat, really. It's got a shear like some of the boats from the islands, and it's not real wide, so it kind of resembles an island boat. Well, there's the first look that anyone's had of the shear of this boat. I love it. It just looks fantastic. It's very, very similar to the model, very similar. The next thing for us to do is put the guards on it, where we've got prepared in the other room, really. We're going to cut the transom down about 3 inches. That's going to be a kind of a trick back there with the skill saw. That's a pretty heavy piece of lumber. You can see the radius on the top of the transom. So, I want to cut all the way through that thing. I had to reduce the saw's depth when I go past the post when I started off, but we are cutting in a radius, and the circular saw has to be pushed right solid against that batten and not allowed to drift whatsoever. Back of the saw blade, the very back of the saw blade is rubbing in the cut because the cut is a radius. It kind of kills a little bit of the power of the saw, but really not much at all. If it was a perfectly straight cut, it would cut even easier. Well, I've got that piece cut right off the transom, and I'm going to put it down here and see if it doesn't change the total look of the boat. And I think it does. It makes it look a lot lower, really, than the piece I cut off, which I like. The other thing I can say is the saw didn't really have any trouble following that curvature. You have to really tend it down against the batten because it'll want to go straight otherwise. So, that came out pretty nice. I had the blade sticking out most all the way across out the back, and that worked good. But when I got to the post, I had to reduce the depth of the cut so that when I went past the post, I wouldn't cut the post, because I'm entertaining leaving those in, to tie off to, like Samson posts. So, it'll work pretty nice. I've got this piece clamped on the shear right here to look kind of like the guard now. The thing is really looking good. It's got a real swept shear like that. It's kind of fishy looking, actually. I love the bow up like that. Not every boat is shaped exactly like this, but this one's kind of pretty. And I'm going to process the guards next and put the guards on it, and then put the breast hook in it. So I've got those pieces next door. Wait till you see them. They need to be planed down. They're too heavy and too wide as well, but they're spectacular. 24 foot 6 inch long right now, and it's just long enough to make the guards on this boat.